There was a sense of anguish that came over me as a result of the death of George Floyd from a police officer kneeling on his neck. I have heard from some of you who are also feeling the same pain in your hearts. It is only right that people are angry and frustrated. The death of George Floyd by the police is part of a long line of brutality against Black people. In an amazing show of solidarity, frustration, and pent-up anger, people began protesting in the streets. Remarkably, other places around the world are also protesting against racism, police violence, and the death, and in solidarity. Before George Floyd, there was another incident that truly made me sad as well. There was a Black man named Christian Cooper, an avid bird watcher in New York City. While bird watching one day, he asked a 41-year-old white woman to put her dog on a leash, which was the bylaw in the Central Park. In response, she phoned 911 saying that an African American man is threatening my life. Meanwhile, he was filming the conversation that she had with the police. And the video, which was posted on Twitter, had generated over 40 million views in a matter of days, setting off a painful discourse about the history of false accusation against Black people made to the police. Because of the video, Christian Cooper did not get arrested, and the woman was fired from her work. And before Christian Cooper, there was Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old young man who was killed for simply jogging in the state of Georgia. And there are countless Black Americans who are killed or who are reported to the police for doing ordinary things. Something is truly wrong here when people are getting killed and being falsely accused for simply being Black. Many people are thinking, it could have been me. Furthermore, 3 times the number of Black Americans are dying of COVID-19 than white Americans. The reason? They generally make less income, so they have less healthcare coverage. They live in neighborhoods with higher pollution, which affects their health. And thirdly, living with racism stresses the body, which weakens the immune system. And why do they make less income? We have to go back to the transatlantic slave trade, the slavery, and the systematic racism and oppression. So COVID-19 has exposed the painful reality of racism and its economic impact and a myriad of other issues. So racism, income inequality, the killing of George Floyd, and the pandemic converged to spark the widespread protests in the streets in the United States and all over the world. I remember back in the 1980s, while I was driving to church one Sunday morning, I heard on the CBC radio about what had taken place in South Africa the night before. In the 1980s, there were lots of demonstrations in the streets in South Africa against apartheid. On that Sunday morning, the news announced that the riot police had opened fire on the protesters, killing something like 22 people. I felt shocked and numbed at the same time as I sat in the church waiting for the church service to begin. My minister back then was the very Reverend Sanctuary before he became the moderator. Appropriately, he addressed the demonstration and the killings in South Africa in his sermon. He said, what had taken place in South Africa was in fact good news. The people of God said no to racism, no to hatred, and no to oppression. The people of God rose up and demonstrated. And they were not afraid, not even death. I was mesmerized by his sermon because what I had considered to be a tragedy, he said, in fact, was good news. Through that lens, I see the current demonstrations, which has become quite peaceful lately. Though I still feel that anguish because of racism and police brutality, the fact that so many people are protesting is a hopeful and wonderful news. In fact, what would be even more disconcerting if no one cared, no one spoke out, and no one demonstrated. Surely, God is in the protesters calling out for a transformation of society. This week, I read a book on American philosopher William James, a professor at Harvard University, and the author of a hugely influential book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. He believed that philosophy was to be experiential. By the same token, I now realize that theology must also be experiential, regularly, deeply, and widely. St. Paul concludes his letter to the church in Corinth by saying, finally, brothers and sisters, farewell. Put things in order, listen to my appeal, agree with one another, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. In our faith, we are to not only believe, but experience and struggle for peace, justice, and love. I say struggle because peace and justice are never given to us on a silver platter, but they must be won over. Furthermore, we cannot experience true peace until all our brothers and sisters are also able to experience peace as well. Ultimately, the anguish we feel at injustice belongs not just to us, but God whose ache is expressed in our soul. So we align our hearts with God in solidarity so that we can work, pray, and struggle for peace with one another. In that struggle, surely God comes alive in us. Thanks be to God.